Hi, Kwon, I'm Malinda, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I'll be talking about my July 2021 wrap-up. I'm trying to remember what I even did for July. I know I went camping. I know I did some gardening. Tried rabbit. That was decent. I've gone fishing a couple times. Everything else seems like work and a blur. So, yeah. But still read a pretty decent amount in July. I participated in one readathon. That was the Tarot Readathon. I was Team Cups, hosted by Deja. I'll leave her channel and all the everything you need for the readathon down in the description down below. I'm hoping they do another one because it was actually really fun. Despite me only being able to submit 3 books, but what are you gonna do? So I thought I did like pretty bad in July, but like I said, 9 books, which is comparable to February, which was also 9 books. In terms of quantity, that's great. In terms of quality, it's actually a little lower than February. A lot of middle of the road books, with an average rating 3.55. I will not be giving like individual ratings on some of these just because I feel like they can change, because a lot of them I am still sitting on to figure out how I feel about them. A lot of just like I don't know feelings this month. So, and it's not necessarily like good. In terms of pages, I read 3,033 pages, which is pretty good considering. And then in terms of genres, I read 1 sci-fi, 3 historical, 1 thriller, 1 nonfiction, 1 fantasy, 1 anthology, and 1 contemporary. I read 2 young adult, in terms of audience, there was 2 young adult books and 7 adult books. Most of these I've read through an audiobook, either through my library or through Libro FM, and then one of them I read physically. The first book I read was a Record of a Spaceborn Few by Becky Chambers. This is the 3rd book in the Wayfarers trilogy after The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and A Close and Common Orbit. I didn't like this one nearly as much as I did A Close and Common Orbit, and neither one of them really compared to this Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which has so far been my favorite. I've heard mixed things of like read this in order, and yes, I would have to agree with this statement because each book follows the events of the previous. So, but this one really kind of throws a wrench in that because I feel like it does and it doesn't. But I also go in knowing that one of the perspectives that we follow in here is actually the sister of the captain of the Wayfarer. There's a bunch of little connections that I particularly enjoy that kind of makes these all connected. However, this one I felt was a little slower. So in The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, we follow the crew of the Wayfarer. In A Close and Common Orbit, we are on a particular port planet, like a planet that is very it's essentially a huge port where people come in to do trades, and some people live there. Particularly, we follow a particular couple that we have met in The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, Blue and Pepper. Pepper is one of the perspectives that we follow. The other is one from a character from The Wayfarer, but because I don't want to give it away, that's all I'm going to leave at that. But we kind of follow Pepper's history and where she had come from and how she grew up, because it's definitely an abnormal thing within the confines of this territory of space. There is essentially a territory that there are strict rules about certain things, and Pepper grew up on the outside of that, where some shady shit happened, and we get to learn more about that. And then for Record of a Spaceborn Few, we follow humans, the descendants of humans that had left Earth. There are certain things that to help them remind them of Earth, but ultimately none of them grew up on Earth. They are all descendants. And some of these descendants have even left these spaceships to go live planet side, not necessarily to Mars, but in other places. And we follow a couple of perspectives in here. Like I said, one of them is the sister of the captain from the Wayfarer, who they grew up on one of these spacecrafts, and we see where she is currently. And then we also get other perspectives, kind of get more of an idea of what it's like to grow up on these spacecrafts. I felt this one was a little slower. I didn't think that the multi-perspective was nearly as good as The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I didn't feel nearly as connected to the characters as I did in the previous two books. And I have thoughts on humans of this book in this series. I have thoughts, but I'm not going to express them yet. There's one more book in this series I would like to finish up and then express all my feelings and thoughts in an all-around review of the series, so bear with me on that. The next book I read was my book of the month pick for June, and that was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. This I listened to as an advanced listener's copy through Libro FM. I have an affiliate link down in the description down below if you're interested in getting an account with them. I actually really enjoy them. It's $14.99 a month, which is the same as Audible. However, Libro FM supports small bookshops as well as doesn't hold reign over specific titles. So like Audible exclusives make it so that no one else can produce them and aren't available outside of Amazon, while Libro FM is kind of, it's better. I feel like it's better. I like it. It's a good alternative. The Maidens, this one's fairly popular right now, and I feel like people have either loved it or hated it, and I feel like I'm more towards the disliked it. The Maidens follows Mariana, who is still grieving the loss of her husband, group therapist, when she gets a call from her niece who doesn't go to Cambridge, but she goes to another school on Cambridge's grounds, saying that her best friend is missing. And Mariana goes to help her niece. When Mariana gets there, it turns out that her niece's best friend has turned up dead, and another girl has gone missing. And so Mariana kind of gets pulled into this mystery and is trying to help figure it out. There is a group on campus that they call themselves the Maidens, who follow an American-born professor. It turns out that these dead girls that are turning up are part of this group, the Maidens. So there is like connection to Greek mythology. Ultimately, it was interesting enough to get through, but I didn't like the way it made me feel. I can't say that I really enjoyed how the story went. I agree with the sentiment that there should have been more of a connection to the Greek mythology, as it kind of felt like it was thrown in there. I feel like ultimately it was just thrown in there to make a connection when, I don't know, it just felt odd. And then, yeah, ultimately I didn't really like the way this book made me feel. There is content warning for trying to get pregnant. So I don't know if it was infertility, death of a significant other, death, grief and loss, stalking. There was an interesting point in here where it connected with Michaelides' previous work of The Silent Patient, which I have yet to read, which was interesting, which it kind of makes me want to read The Silent Patient despite not necessarily liking this book. Ultimately didn't really like the way this made me feel, and I kept questioning some of Mariana's choices. Right now it's a 2-star. I almost want to put it lower, but I don't know how to feel about it, so that's where it's at right now. Next book I read was actually the most surprising, and that is The Help by Kathryn Stockett. I had actually received this physical copy as a gift from my father several years ago. I think it was like when the movie adaptation came out, and yeah, it took me a while to like get into this book. But I found the audiobook through my library, which I really enjoyed, and I think this is a tome. Yep, it is over 500 pages, so yay, finally reading some tomes. This one is based in the 1960s in Jackson, Mississippi. We are following the accounts of two black maids in Jackson. Aileen, who is taking care of her 17th white child for a family, and Minnie, who kind of has a mouth on her and has just lost her job and is trying to get another one, but her reputation kind of is like around Jackson is known, so it's hard for her to find another job. And then we are also following Skeeter, who is a white socialite who has just returned from college, only to find that her black maid that basically raised her is gone. And the only thing her parents were tell her is that she just up and quit and she left. But the town seems to know otherwise, but no one seems to be willing to tell Skeeter. So Skeeter wants to be a published writer and has this idea to give the black maids in Jackson, Mississippi a voice. So she enlists the help of Aileen to get the good, the bad, the ugly stories from black maids in Jackson, Mississippi, which is easier said than done. I ultimately really enjoyed this book, particularly as an audiobook. The narration style was really pleasant. We did get all three perspectives, which I really enjoyed. And it's like it waned and flowed depending on where the narration was at and whose narration we were under to whether or not I enjoyed it. There was some aspects where I'm like, no, I want to listen to more of Aileen's part, or no, I want to listen to more of Minnie's part, which I think is ultimately really good. And when it comes to multiple perspectives. One thing that I did have an issue with is content warnings for because this is I believe during Jim Crow laws, 1960s, which isn't as not that far off, honestly, in terms of history. But there is stereotyping, slurs, hate crimes, hate speech, segregation, miscarriage, infertility, graphic depictions of injury. But one part that I didn't particularly enjoy is that there were occasional mentions of Native Americans, but one of which I wanted to explore more, as someone had gotten medicine from a Native American, and they made the comment going, we're poisoning their water, why would they help us? And I kind of wanted them to explore that more, because the only other time Native Americans were mentioned was how fast they spend their paycheck to get drunk, which I feel like is another harmful stereotype. So that I feel like was a missed opportunity, but at the same time, I don't know how that would have worked with the elements that were already in here. Like I said, I really did enjoy this. I liked the growth that Skeeter had within this book, as well as her voice. I enjoyed that, and especially with Aileen and Minnie, there was such good growth in here. I really enjoyed it. I didn't quite give it a 5-star. I think I gave it like a 4.5, but I still really I was surprised by this. The next book I read was for the Tarot Readathon, which and that was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. This one is following Lily, who is Chinese American, and it's during the 1950s in San Francisco. So going from the help to this was a little odd, because I was listening to this it was off through the library. And I listened to it off and on and read it physically off and on. But it was real odd going from this narration to this, because I still had like that southern accent with my inner monologue. So it was really weird to go into with this one. But basically 1950s San Francisco, the United States is going through the Red Scare. Basically they're afraid of communism. Everyone's looking at Chinese Americans under scrutiny. Lily is Chinese American. She has grown up in Chinatown, San Francisco, and is 17 going on 18, and is realizing that she may be a lesbian, which was at the time was also looked down upon. So we kind of get her perspective as she's exploring that and kind of trying to figure that out, as well as the fallout of her figuring it out. So there is content warning for forced outing, as well as stereotypes. What would you call it? It's like when you're yeah, it ultimately, so this was for the prompt of a book that you think will be a tearjerker. This did ultimately make me cry, not only because of Lily's forced outing and how her family reacts to it and the options that she ends up receiving because of it, but also her relationship with her siblings, which I would have liked more explored. Because as it was, there was a moment where her eldest brother tried to stand up to her or for her, and went to her asking how he can stand up for her. And it was just really sweet. So that made me cry. Her forced outing made me cry. Her options made me cry. Yeah, ultimately really sweet book. Though I do have to say that the first half of the book was kind of slow for me. I'm not the biggest fan of high school YA. But it was still interesting enough. I really enjoyed Kathryn here as well, Lily's friend. I liked both of their explorations into science, because at the time it was fairly rare for women to get into science. So that I really enjoyed, and ultimately the book I enjoyed as a whole. It's just not one of my favorites. Next book I read was also for the Tarot Readathon, and that was Gathering Moss. I have more of my thoughts on this as a full review, as well as in my blog. Same with the Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I believe both of these, no, Last Night at the Telegraph Club I have more of my thoughts on in the part 1 of the blog, and this would be in part 2, but I also have a full review of it if you want to take a look. But ultimately, Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer is a natural and cultural history of mosses. Ultimately, if you've read Braiding Sweetgrass, it's like taking a chapter out of Braiding Sweetgrass and expanding it, and asking Robin Wall Kimmerer to expand on it. Ultimately, a little sciencey for my taste, but ultimately really did enjoy it. I truly enjoy Robin Wall Kimmerer's writing, particularly the mix of essays of cultural history with scientific research. So it's just like a great thing, a great combination. So she is one that I will be keeping an eye out for more works. I think she has helped with other works, but in terms of own books, I think I completed her own works that are out right now. I can only hope for more. Next book I read was also for the Tarot Readathon, and that was Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas. This is a Peter Pan retelling that I actually have a full book review for that I will be putting out here shortly, so I won't talk too much about this. Ultimately, this was very middle of the road for me. It was on the darker side, which I enjoyed, but I feel like it could have been pushed further. I had a problem with Wendy. I had a problem with Peter. Ultimately, I have issues with Peter Pan regarding the original story as well as retellings. But I enjoyed Aiden Thomas's aspect of Peter Pan in terms of Peter Pan's role. It was very interesting. I also have more thoughts in my blog, part 2, if you want to check that out. Otherwise, be sure to look out for my full review coming out for this book. Next, I read The Pull of Stars by Emma Donoghue. I have read Emma Donoghue before, not Room, but what was it? I can't remember. No, she has a lot more than I expected. The Wonder. I've read The Wonder by Emma Donoghue and actually surprisingly enjoyed it when I read it. This one is the UK edition, which I really enjoy, actually. A little better than the US edition. But basically we are following Nurse Julia Powers during 1918 Dublin. People are dying from influenza. There's also a brink of a war there is a war going on. And so we're following Nurse Julia Powers as she is now has been put in charge of, like, she works. Okay, hold on. Let me just read you this. Dublin, 1918, in a country doubly ravaged by war and disease. Nurse Julia Power works at an understaffed hospital in the city centre, where expectant mothers who have come down with the unfamiliar flu are quarantined together. Into Julia's stressful world step two outsiders, Dr. Kathleen Lynn, on the run from the police, and a young volunteer helper, Bridie Sweeney. This is historical fiction, but I guess Kathleen Lynn is actually a person that happened, that influenced, was a big influence of Dublin in 1918. So that was pretty cool. In the darkness and intensity of this tiny ward over the course of 3 days, these women change each other's lives in unexpected ways. They lose patience to this baffling pandemic, but they also shepherd new life into the fearful world. With tireless tenderness and humanity, carers and mothers alike somehow do their impossible work. Enjoyed this. I thought it was very heartbreaking. There is content warning for death, particularly during a flu that they don't know much about in a pandemic. Also, childbirth, miscarriages, talk of domestic abuse and domestic violence. Also, the Catholic Church. That's one thing I particularly actually really enjoyed about this, was that throughout the book, Nurse Powers is consistently questioning nuns and priests under the Catholic Church and the actual good they're doing. I think she questioned at one point, going, who puts these old white people in charge? So very interesting. There's also that a history there with Dublin, Ireland sending their men to go fight England's war. So that, I wish there was some things that were more explored, particularly when it comes to that. But ultimately, really enjoyed this little slice of historical fiction, particularly of that era. So this next book was also for the Tarot Readathon. However, I didn't finish it before the readathon ended, and therefore couldn't count it towards my team. But that is Kink, edited by R.O. Kwon and Garth Greenwell. This is a collection of stories that revolve around sexual desire, BDSM, love, etc. The only two people that I had read stories from before was Roxane Gay and Carmen Maria Machado. I enjoyed some stories in here. I think there was maybe 3 or 4 that I ultimately enjoyed out of 15. Not quite what I expected, though I couldn't tell you what I had expected going into this. I don't know if it's just because it's not what I expected, because that's not what I had in mind in terms of Kink. And so I think that was one thing with this anthology that really helped in terms of opening my mind up to other aspects of Kink. But I can't say I necessarily enjoyed all the stories. There were some stories that involve some depravity that I'm particularly not one to enjoy. So while others may enjoy being humiliated or looked down upon in a particular way, I just didn't like it at all. But there was also, what I did enjoy about this was the diversity in here. Other than that, I'm still trying to figure out how I ultimately feel about this book, mostly because there were a couple stories in here that I felt slogged down by. Not to say that they weren't good, they just necessarily weren't for me, or they were particularly long. I know that Carmen Maria Machado's booking work in this contribution to this book was almost 50 pages long, but most of them were between 10 and 20 pages, which I don't know, that inconsistency for some reason kind of bugs me. and I'm not sure why. I don't read a whole lot of anthologies very often, and I think it's just ultimately me figuring out what I do and don't like about them. So, content warnings, and this is very sexually explicit if you couldn't tell by the title. Very graphic in its depictions. There are some elements that actually scared me in terms of domestic violence, hate crimes, stalking, peeping toms, use of power to a point, so just be wary going in. And this last book that I read for July is also one that I am still trying to figure out how I feel about, and that is An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This one was a February 2018 pick for Book of the Month, and I found the audiobook through my library and read it that way. Let me tell you what it's about. So, newlyweds Celestial and Roy are the embodiment of both the American dream and the New South. He is a young business executive, and she is an artist on the brink of an exciting career. But as they settle into the routine of their life together, they are suddenly ripped apart by circumstances neither could have imagined. While visiting Roy's parents in their small Louisiana town, Roy is arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison for a crime Celestial knows he did not commit. Though fiercely independent, Celestial finds herself unmoored, taking comfort in Andre, her childhood best friend and Roy's best man, at their wedding. As Roy's time in prison passes, she is unable to hold on to the love that has been her center. When after 5 years, Roy's conviction is suddenly overturned, he returns to Atlanta, ready to resume their life together. Celestial is faced with a soul-wrenching decision, whether to let go or to try to rebuild a marriage that has lost its underpinnings. I like the complexity of the characters throughout this whole book, and basically it just let me know that each and every one of these characters that we follow are flawed. And there was a sense of humanity to that. But at the same time, as I got to know each and every one of the characters, the more I disliked them. Roy, I originally felt bad for because I felt like was caught up in that system of he was arrested for something he didn't do, and because he was black in a southern state, he was just kind of forced to pay someone else's price for a crime he didn't commit, and was sentenced to prison. But some of the arguments he and his wife end up having, I felt were very trivial comparatively, and I thought that there was a lot of miscommunication going on, which I get happens in relationships all over the world. However, and I was able to kind of get over that. However, when he finally gets out and tries to go back to his wife, there was a sense of, I didn't like his mindset of just oh, she never served me divorce papers, so she's still my wife. My key still fits in the house. She's still my wife. There must still be love there. This anticipation and expectation of she's still my wife, that means something. Only for him to be out 2 days and have sex with someone else. So there was this weird one-sidedness to it that really bothered me. There was also this thing throughout this whole book of women do certain things and men do men things. I get that it's that it could very well be this cultural aspect of the South, of Louisiana, Georgia area, that maybe me as a Northern Californian don't quite understand. Not to say that there isn't some sexist or roles that are played by the sexes here locally. There definitely are. Doesn't mean that I don't still try to fight against them, or sometimes just feel awkward by them because I feel I can't fight against them, because sometimes that comes culturally and for some of our indigenous practices. But when it came to this, it was very bothersome. And there was at one point where Roy was definitely trying to wield his own power in terms of making his wife have sex with him. I was not okay with this. I also was just really kind of flustered and bothered by Celestial's role in it, of just like I completely and I kind of I sympathize with her a lot more towards the end, because it is a hard thing. I sympathize with her in the beginning. It started to wane towards the middle. I started to gain it back towards the end, but I still had a hard time with her, like having a hard time making a decision when like Roy tries to wield power over her like that. And not, again, this is, I think, my privilege of not having someone try to wield power over me or try to abuse that power by doing so. But it was just, but there was also this aspect of like something I also didn't agree with when Roy did get home. He was trying to still act like they were husband and wife, and she wasn't responding, and she specifically said, if yes means yes and no means no, what does silence mean? In my opinion, that's still not consent, and it bothered me to hell that that was even put into question. So we also follow Andre's perspective, which I'm not sure how to feel about. I don't know. I like the complexity of the characters. I didn't necessarily like some of the qualms that they had. For instance, Roy trying to wield his power and try to claim that power. It was just, I don't ultimately don't know how to feel about some of the things in here. This is definitely one of the ones that made me like not want to rate each individual of this book specifically, because I still don't know how to feel about this book. It was entertaining enough to read, and I appreciated the complexity in each one of the characters. But some of the problems that got brought up was just so frustrating that I ended up disliking the characters immensely, particularly when it came to Roy, or the fact that silence as consent even was brought into question. So yeah, content warning for false imprisonment, death, abortion, mentions of rape, threat of rape. At one point, Roy ends up saying that he could take it. It would be easy for him to take it, but he won't, which I don't know what the point of that was, but ultimately made me like, I dislike Roy immensely. Putting that out there for a woman to know is not okay. Like, even, no, I'm not okay with this. Mention of suicide attempt, and cheating. So, but there is an aspect of like all this frustration that I actually enjoy, because it does make me feel something. It does make me like hold firm in some of my decisions of morality that Tayari Jones was able to bring up. And that's saying something for her writing. However, I don't necessarily like it. So yeah. So these are the books that I've read for July. If you have read any of these, I would like to hear your thoughts and opinions on them down in the comments down below. Please, no spoilers. Hopefully I didn't spoil anything for you. I know that sometimes if I am in the throes of passion, that I sometimes don't know how to describe something without describing every single detail. So I apologize, but yeah. If you've made it this far, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you have yet to do so already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon to get notified when I post more content. Yeah. Hopefully you've had a decent July and are excited for August. I know that those of you who are going back to university or school, like, take your time and enjoying this time off before it starts, but like, know that you've got this. So yeah. Otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I will see you in another video very soon. Ciao.